Code it now. So for this activity, we want to find the sum of the multiples of 3 and 5 from 1 to 1000. So if we think about this, we've actually sort of written a file that's going to end up appearing very similar to this already. So if we look here, and we look at sum evens AB, which we wrote a few videos ago, the structure is going to be very similar. We're going to have a sum. We're going to have a range of numbers, so A to B, but in this case, we're just going to hard code it into the for loop syntax itself. And then the important part here is that we're going to be checking if a number is divisible by another number. And this is important because here we want to sum all the numbers that are multiples of 3 and 5. So for example, numbers like 15, 45, both of these numbers, when you divide them by 3 and by 5, you get remainders of 0 each time. So the code is going to be very similar. So we're going to copy the code from this file and then create a new file. So let's copy all that, Control C, Control N for a new file, hit Enter for Java, and then Control V to paste. Okay, and then we're going to change the name of the file, so let's call it SumMultiples. And yeah, just SumMultiples, that's enough. We don't want too long of a class name. Okay, and now we want to change some things here. So we're no longer going to need to define separate variables for where we start and where we end our for loop. We're just going to hand code it into the for loop itself so we can get rid of A and B. We still want a sum variable, so this is fine. We want to change our comment up here. We no longer want to compute the sum of the even numbers. We want to compute the sum of all numbers that are multiples of 3 and 5 between 1 and 1000. I believe 1000, right? Yeah, 1000. Okay. So now we can continue. So we have our comment, we have our sum. Now we have to play around with our for statement. So we no longer want to start from A because there is no A. We just want to start from 1 as we wrote in our comment up here. And instead of stopping once we get to B, we want to stop once we get to 1000. And in this case, again, it's going to be very similar to that file that we copied from, SumAB. We want to go step by step, number by number, and check whether or not each number is divisible by 3 and by 5. And if it is, then we sum it. So we're still going to keep this if statement here, but of course we're going to change the comment. So let's change this up. A number is a multiple of 3 and 5 if it can be divided by 3 and 5 without any remainder. Okay, so now let's go back to our code here. So before for that SumAB problem, we had this whole thing with I modulus or remainder 2 equals 0. But this time we don't want 2. We don't care about whether our number is divisible by 2. Instead, we care about whether or not it's divisible by 3. So we can just change that 2 to a 3. So now we're saying if the number that we're checking, the current value of the iterator variable, the I, so if the remainder of I divided by 3 is 0, and we want to make sure that we have the and there. So I like to use a lot of parentheses for my code, so I'm going to add an extra parentheses outside, and then I'm going to write the and. So like this, and make sure you add the 2 parentheses there. And then I'm going to add another set of parentheses. This is going to, and this very inner part of the parentheses is going to be for, again, I percent, meaning modulus, and instead of 3, 5. Now we're going to go right outside the parentheses, put a space there. We're going to check if it's equal to 0. So now you can see what we have is if I divided by 3 has a remainder of 0, and I divided by 5 has a remainder of 0, if and only if both of those things are true, do we add it to the sum. So that looks good to me. And of course, you don't need this many parentheses. You can use however many parentheses you want. I just like to be safe sometimes and use a good amount of them, but obviously it can be a trade-off because the more you add, the messier it may look, but also at the same time, it's more clear about what it is exactly that you're doing. So you can decide on what your style will be. Okay, and the last thing we need to change, of course, is the print statement. So this comment here is fine, but the quote we're going to want to change. So sum of all of the numbers that are multiples of 3 and 5 from 1 to 1000 is space, and we want to concatenate that string with the sum. And then we have our semicolon at the end. So all of that should be okay, and I think we're done. Let's save our file, Control S, accept the defaults, enter. Okay, and then Control B to compile. Okay, no issues with our compiling, which is great. And now Control R to run. Okay, so now sum of all the numbers that are multiples of 3 and 5 from 1 to 1000 is 33,165. That's a pretty big number, but we should expect a pretty big number since we're going from 1 to 1000, and there's bound to be a lot of numbers that are multiples of both 3 and 5 between that range. So this number seems like it's probably the right number. Okay, that's it.